Just a nurse. That's what Dr. Mercer whispered to the residents as he watched her work. Just a nurse who moved through the ER like she owned it, though her credentials said she'd never set foot in a classroom beyond nursing school. They didn't know. Not one of them knew what her hands had done in the darkness 3 miles outside Bagram. They didn't know about Sergeant Maria Vasquez, whose name she couldn't speak aloud anymore, whose folded flag sat in a locker between shifts like a secret that could kill her if the wrong person found it. The 75th Ranger Regiment doesn't send women, but the Pentagon had stopped pretending 6 years ago, and Katie Rodriguez had stopped answering to her real name when she clocked into Seattle General as an ordinary floor nurse with scars on her knuckles shaped like teeth marks and a DoD badge hidden in a tampon box. The fluorescent lights of the ER hum at exactly 60 Hz, a frequency that used to mean helicopter rotors in her sleep. Katie arrives at 6:19 a.m., 14 minutes before shift change, in pressed scrubs with hospital corners that could cut paper and boots that could pass inspection at Fort Bragg. The intercom crackles. Code Blue, Trauma Bay 3. Her jaw doesn't tighten. Her hands don't shake. She moves. 2 strides to the supply cart, grabs a 14-gauge angiocath needle without looking, muscle memory from a field thoracotomy performed with a combat knife and no anesthesia except adrenaline and the weight of 3 soldiers depending on her steady hands. The resident at the bedside fumbles with the intubation equipment, laryngoscope trembling, his angle wrong by maybe 5 degrees but enough to cost a patient if he's not careful. Katie doesn't speak. She steps closer. Catches his wrist. Adjusts the blade with one finger. Shows him. The attending physician, Dr. Chen, who has worked with Katie for 9 months and still doesn't know her real rank, nods. The resident stares at her like she just wrote a medical equation on the wall with her fingertips. The patient's oxygen saturation climbs, 71, 76, 82. Stabilizing. That's when Dr. Mercer walks in, silver-haired and spotless in his white coat despite the hour, his eyes catching on Katie like she's a wrinkle he needs to press out. He's been medical director of Seattle General for 31 years and has the kind of face that's forgotten how to be wrong about anything. His jaw does that thing where he sucks his teeth slightly, a tell that Katie learned to read in her first week, annoyance, resentment, the specific rage of a man watching someone accomplish something without his permission. She feels his gaze on her back as she steps away from the bed, washing her hands in the sink. The water is exactly the temperature she needs it to be, neither hot nor cold, just efficient. She dries them on a paper towel. 1 pull. 1 toss. The trash opens and closes without her looking at it. Dr. Mercer approaches the chart. He reads Katie's note from the previous shift, vitals at 23:14, 23:08, 0:22. Heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure all documented in military time, no explanation, no conversion to civilian standard. The notation is perfect, cleaner than civilian format, actually, easier to track progression in a crisis. It's also wildly outside protocol. He makes a small sound in his throat like he's caught her stealing. Interesting documentation style, he says, loud enough for the residents to hear. Loud enough for that one note of condescension to land like a predator dropping its voice right before the strike. Katie doesn't turn around. She moves to the next patient, a woman with a chest tube who needs her dressing changed. Her hands are steady as a surgical laser, steady as they were the night she carried Maria Vasquez 3 miles under mortar fire, steady enough to keep 3 soldiers alive when there was no hospital, no equipment, nothing but dirt and blood and the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. In the break room at 8:15 a.m., Dr. Mercer sits across from 2 nurses, Jennifer and Melissa, both on the day shift, both on Katie's rotation for the past 6 months. His voice is conversational. Casual. Concerned. I'm just saying, that military time format she uses, I wonder if it's a sign of something else going on. Inflexibility. Maybe some kind of control issue. He lets that hang. Or was she trained in something like that? The question is a hook disguised as curiosity. Jennifer's eyes narrow. Melissa sets her coffee down a fraction too carefully. Mercer has done this before, maybe 100 times across 31 years, planting seeds the way you plant landmines, let them grow roots beneath the surface until someone steps on them and the whole thing explodes. He doesn't yell. He doesn't bluster. He suggests. He mentions. He wonders aloud. By the time people figure out they've been poisoned, the toxin is already in their bloodstream. Katie doesn't hear this. She's in the pharmacy at 8:23 a.m., pulling the access logs for the night shift, 6 weeks of data showing exactly which nurses accessed which medications at what time. A pattern has emerged. Night shift supervisor, Marcus Webb, accessing fentanyl at rates that don't match patient counts, at times that don't match shift hours. This is the real work. This is why the DoD sent her in. Not to save lives in the ER, though that's what she does. That's what her hands do automatically while her mind watches for the specific kind of theft that kills faster than any bullet because it travels through a supply chain that touches 12 hospitals across Texas. The pharmacy window is cold under her fingertips. Stainless steel. She photographs 3 pages of logs with the phone they gave her, the one that doesn't connect to any network, the one with a Pentagon direct line that she's never actually called because calling would mean she's done and she's not done, not yet. At 9:53 a.m., during a patient transport, Katie passes her locker. She pops it open, combination 23-47-14, the year Maria died, the month, the day that Katie learned how to breathe with half her chest crushed. The flag is there, trifolded into that perfect triangle, red and white and blue the way the army folds them for the families of the dead. Except Maria's family never got one because Maria wasn't officially there, wasn't on any roster, and the only flag Katie has is the one she folded herself using the knife that had just been inside a man's chest cavity trying to keep his heart from drowning. She touches it once. Her hand doesn't tremble. The trembling isn't fear. The trembling is restraint. The trembling is 31 years of training compressed into a nerve fiber that knows how to break a man's ribs open and how to break a man's neck and how to fold a flag so tight it could cut your fingers if you tried to unfold it too fast. She closes the locker. The sound it makes is a click. Just a click. But it's the kind of click a gun makes when someone chambers around. Bay 4 has been occupied since 7:38 a.m. Construction worker, fell from scaffolding, fractured tibia, lacerations on his left forearm. Nothing serious by ER standards, stabilize, X-ray, set up orthopedic consult. Katie hasn't looked at him yet. She's been 3 bays over, 2 hallways down, doing the work that keeps the hospital breathing. But his voice carries. He's flirting with the new nurse, a kid named Rachel who's been at Seattle General for maybe 6 weeks. So you ever serve? He's asking, his words slurring slightly from the morphine drip someone started about 20 minutes ago. You got that look, you know? Like you've seen something. Rachel laughs. Says something about Rotking College. Says something about reserve guard duty in Kansas. He's not interested. He keeps asking. Keeps looking. His left forearm is visible from Katie's position in Bay 5. The tattoo is fresh, maybe 3 years old, the ink still holding its color better than most. It's a call sign. Reaper 6. Below it, coordinates, 34.8305 degrees north, 68.9889 degrees east, Bagram. The exact grid where she'd found him with 2 rounds in his right shoulder and 1 in his left leg, bleeding into the dirt at a rate that meant unconsciousness in 4 minutes and death in 6. She'd been moving supplies from one crash cart to another when she recognized it. That's all it took. 1 glance. 1 moment. The world didn't reshape itself exactly, but it tilted on its axis just enough that she had to adjust her stance to keep standing. That was the patient she'd kept alive with her hands and a prayer she doesn't believe in anymore. That was the soldier whose mother she'd looked at through a video call, his mother not knowing that the Navy captain on the screen had held her son's spleen in her palm for 7 minutes while waiting for the medevac Black Hawk. He doesn't know her. That's the strangest part. He's looking right at her now, and there's nothing in his eyes except the morphine blur and mild interest in the new nurse's answer about Kansas. He's alive. He's talking. His flirting with a girl named Rachel at 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in San Antonio, and none of that would have happened if Katie had waited for the evacuation team, if she decided to leave him there, if her hands had been just slightly less steady. Dr. Mercer's office is on the 3rd floor. Katie has never been inside it. She knows what's there anyway: the framed degrees from Johns Hopkins, the photograph with 2 senators, the replica of some kind of medical instrument from the 1800s that probably costs more than her yearly salary. She knows this because the other nurses talk about it the way people talk about things that make them feel smaller. Right now, Mercer is sitting at his desk, and he's making a call. Not to the hospital administration. Not yet. This is phase 1. This is the grinding of gears that happens before the trap snaps closed. He's calling an old friend, a colleague at UT Health San Antonio who sits on a nursing board that could make certain credentials disappear. He's being vague. He's being concerned. He's saying things like competent in her way and perhaps not enough supervision, and I'm just thinking about patient safety. The gears turn. Seeds planted. The machinery has started. But Katie doesn't know this yet. At 10:02 a.m., she's washing her hands again, and she's thinking about the way Sergeant Vasquez's eyes looked when she understood she wasn't getting out. The way Vasquez had stopped asking questions and started giving orders, the way she'd made Katie swear, promise, swear on your mother's grave, swear on everything, that she would finish the mission, that she would get the 3 soldiers back to base, that she would not die here and that Katie would not die trying to save someone who was already gone. Katie had sworn. Katie had kept Maria's dog tags in her right boot for 2 years afterward, until the Pentagon found out and told her that was a security risk. The tags are still in her locker now, in an envelope under the flag. The water runs clear. Her hands are clean. They've been clean for 5 years and they will never be clean again. The ER goes on. Patients arrive. Patients leave. The fluorescent lights hum their 60 Hz song. Katie moves through it all like a ghost who takes very good care of her living patients. But the man in Bay 4 is still there, and his call sign is still on his arm, and somewhere in this building, Dr. Mercer is still making phone calls, still planting seeds, still deciding which thread to pull first to unravel a woman he doesn't recognize. And Katie, who has survived mortar fire and blood loss and the knowledge that she left someone behind in the dirt, is about to learn that some battles don't come with warning and some enemies wear white coats and have the backing of 31 years of institutional power. Thursday morning at Seattle General, the conference room fills with 30 residents in short white coats, laptops open, coffee steaming in paper cups with hospital logos. Dr. Mercer stands at the front with a wireless remote, his suit pressed to military precision, navy with a burgundy tie that costs more than Katie's weekly groceries. He clicks through case studies. Routine presentations. Standard protocols. Then he stops. Katie's patient chart fills the projection screen. The chart where she documented vitals in military time, 1430 instead of 2:13 p.m. 06:45 instead of 6:45 a.m. The format she learned in the field, where time standardization meant no one misread critical moments and soldiers didn't die from confusion. Nurse Rodriguez, Mercer says, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed, believes her unconventional methods supersede established protocols. He circles the military time notation with a red laser pointer. The dot hovers over 1430 like an accusation. This confusion could kill someone, he announces. The residents lean forward, suddenly attentive. This is not a lecture. This is a public execution. This patient survived despite her documentation failures, not because of them. Our nursing staff follows established standards. Not improvisation. Not whatever civilian practices might feel expedient. Katie stands at the back wall, her hands clasped behind her back in parade rest, a position her body assumes without conscious permission. Jaw muscles tighten, imperceptible, like the adjustment of a rifle scope. She doesn't blink. She doesn't shift her weight. She is a statue in scrubs while 30 pairs of eyes dart sideways to watch her, waiting for the tremor, the flush, the tears that would confirm they'd just witnessed humiliation work as intended. The silence is the kind that makes fluorescent lights feel louder. One resident, a second year from Johns Hopkins, leans over and whispers something to his neighbor. The neighbor nods, eyes still locked on Katie. She watches them in her peripheral vision the way a sniper tracks movement in the tree line. No flinching. No acknowledgement. Just the steady recognition of a threat mapped and catalogued. Mercer clicks to the next slide. A different patient. Different case. But the damage is already set, spreading through the room like iodine in water. That afternoon, Katie approaches the vending machine on the 3rd floor. Two nurses, Sarah and Jen, stand shoulder to shoulder, laughing about weekend plans. Jen's voice carries, and I told him, absolutely not, I don't care if it's his mother's birthday. They're holding snacks, coins in hand, the casual intimacy of people who've worked 12-hour shifts together and still want to grab lunch. Katie reaches for a bottle of water. The conversation stops mid-sentence. Not gradually. Complete. Like switching off a light. Sarah's expression shifts. Something closes behind her eyes. She takes her trail mix from the machine and turns, and Jen follows, and they walk away without acknowledgement, without the pretense of politeness. Katie hears Jen's whisper before they round the corner toward the break room. Mercer says she's dangerous. She stands at the vending machine, hand still outstretched toward the water bottle she didn't retrieve. Her reflection stares back at her from the chrome exterior, a woman in scrubs with a collapsing perimeter. The social network has already begun its recalculation. She will eat alone now. She will chart alone. The invisible scaffolding of human connection that makes hospitals bearable has been systematically dismantled by a man in a burgundy tie who has nothing to prove except that power still matters. But that wasn't the worst part. Friday during shift change, the busiest 30 minutes of the day when the ER transforms, incoming nurses taking report from outgoing shifts, families in the waiting room sorting medications and paperwork, residents presenting cases to attendings, Dr. Mercer stages his spectacle with the precision of a man who has spent 31 years learning which moves create maximum visibility. Katie is at Bay 7, documenting vitals on a patient with acute gastroenteritis, her hand steady on the 4-pole, checking the flow rate on the drip. The incoming nurse arrives to receive report. Katie's voice is professional, clipped, 42-year-old male, abdominal pain since Tuesday, vomiting 6 times in the past 4 hours, last dose of ondansetron 0800 hours, electrolytes pending. The room around her hasn't changed. The same beeping monitors. The same smell of antiseptic and body fluids and desperation. The same chaos of a hospital in transition. Then Mercer's voice cuts through everything. Nurse Rodriguez, security will escort you to HR for a compliance discussion. He doesn't approach. He doesn't lower his voice. He states it the way he stated her documentation failures, with the tone of someone delivering facts to an audience. 2 security guards flank him, positioned near the main desk where everyone can see. 50 people turn. The waiting room goes quiet. Conversations stop. A mother holding a vomit bag pauses mid-motion. A resident presenting a case loses his thread. The entire floor becomes a stage, and Katie is the performance. She finishes documenting her patient's status with measured, deliberate movements. Not hurried. Not defiant. Each keystroke is a decision. She signs off to the incoming nurse with no change in tone, completing the handoff as if this were the natural conclusion of her shift rather than a public removal. Then she stands, hands at her sides, and turns to face the guards. Her posture is perfect. Shoulders back. Chin level. The stance of someone who has stood at attention in front of colonels and senators and machine gun fire. She walks toward the 2 security guards with the fluid precision of a predator that has already accepted the cage, no resistance, no dignity lost because dignity isn't something she carries in her facial expressions or her voice. It lives somewhere deeper. Mercer watches. He's expecting tears. Anger. Defiance. Some crack in the facade that he can cite in his incident report as further evidence of instability. She passes him without making eye contact, without acknowledging his existence. She might have been walking past furniture. The construction worker in Bay 4, the one with her call sign tattooed on his forearm, watches her being escorted out between two security guards, and something flickers across his expression. Recognition. Not complete, but familiar. The way someone walks. The way someone carries themselves under pressure. He's seen that before. He knows that walk. He can't place it yet. That night, the supply closet on the 3rd floor is darker than it should be. The fluorescent light has been burned out for 3 days and nobody has filed a work order. Katie stands in that darkness with one hand pressed against cold metal shelving, her forehead against the edge where the shelf meets the vertical support. The metal is cold enough to hurt. She breathes in measured counts of 4, the technique taught in stress management courses, the same technique used before helicopter insertions, before the moment when you jump and commit to the mission. 4 counts in through her nose. Hold for 4. Out through her mouth for 4. Her hands shake with adrenaline that has nowhere to go, violence that has no target, and the trembling isn't fear. It's restraint. It's the coiled potential of someone trained to break things, forced to remain still. Her eyes adjust to the darkness. She can see the shapes of boxes, the outlines of supplies. The darkness is familiar. The silence is familiar. This small room with metal walls is not unlike the concrete bunker at Kandahar where she waited for extraction after the patrol went sideways and someone didn't make it back, and she carried his body for 3 miles knowing that every step was a step away from bringing him home. She presses her forehead against the metal until her breathing steadies. Until the trembling stops. Until the woman who walked past Dr. Mercer without acknowledgement, who documented patient charts with perfect precision, who stood in conference rooms and absorbed humiliation like concrete absorbs bullets, is the only version of herself that remains. The room went dead silent. Then, somewhere in the hospital, a monitor alarmed. A distant sound. A summons. A reason to step back into the fluorescent light and become again the nurse who asks permission, who follows protocols, who accepts that competence without credentials is the most dangerous thing a hospital can tolerate. She steps out of the supply closet. Her shift continues. The ER at Seattle General ran half-empty on Tuesday nights at 2:38 a.m. A sleeping child in Bay 2, monitors beeping their steady 4-count rhythm like a metronome. An elderly stroke patient in Bay 6, her daughter dozing in the visitor's chair with her head tilted against the wall. Katie was restocking the crash cart in the hallway when the automatic doors exploded inward. 7 feet of muscle and rage, high on PCP, waving a stolen service weapon like it weighed nothing. A Glock 22, police issue, probably taken during an arrest gone wrong. The man's eyes were black, pupils dilated to the edges, veins standing out on his neck like rope. I need opiates. His voice cracked the fluorescent-lit silence. Now! Give me the pills. The security guard, Marcus, trained 3 months ago, certification still laminated in his wallet, froze. His hand moved toward his radio and stopped halfway, like someone had hit pause on a video. His jaw worked soundlessly. The gun moved in the man's hand with the recklessness of someone who didn't understand what it could do, and that was worse than if he'd understood perfectly. Dr. Mercer appeared from his office doorway 40 feet away. He saw the weapon. He saw the chaos blooming outward like spilled ink. His face went white and he backed toward his office, hand reaching for the door frame, moving with the deliberate slowness of someone trying not to attract the predator's attention. Katie's hands moved before her mind could overrule them. Muscle memory took over. The 3 tours, the 214 Marines she'd worked alongside in Helmand Province, the field thoracotomy she'd performed with a combat knife when the surgical tent got mortared, all of it lived in her shoulders and hands and legs, waiting. Her boots crossed the 30 feet in 4 strides. Her movements came from a place deeper than thought, the place where the body remembers survival. The gunman turned toward the sound of her approach. The barrel swung. She was already moving left, her forearm up, the strike redirecting the pistol's aim upward at a 45-degree angle. The gun discharged. The sound was catastrophic in the enclosed space, louder than anything should be, louder than the monitors screaming their alarms, louder than the child in Bay 2 now crying in confusion and terror. She used his height against him. A 7-foot frame was a liability when someone knew how to exploit leverage. Katie dropped her center, hooked behind his knee with her shin, and swept upward with the explosive rotation of someone trained in close-quarters combat by people who'd spent 30 years perfecting how to end threats in hostile territory. His body went airborne. The impact came fast, triage desk first, then the floor. The wind knocked out of him in a single guttural wheeze that sounded like a door slamming. 8 seconds. The entire sequence took 8 seconds. The gun skittered across the tile floor. Katie didn't pick it up. She moved to the man's hands, already pulling zip ties from her cargo pocket, muscle memory from a different war, a different time, and secured his wrists with the same calm she'd used to start and for. Her hands were shaking. The adrenaline was there, the same adrenaline she'd felt 5 years ago in Bagram when the Taliban attack started and she'd carried a dying Marine 3 miles to the medevac chopper while bullets tore through sandbags around her head. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. She checked his pulse at the carotid artery. Thready but present. Still breathing. No signs of active hemorrhage. The pupils remained blown, but that was the drug, not a neurological emergency. Respirations at 16, she said to nobody, to everybody, to the empty air that suddenly felt crowded. Pulse 108. Alert and responsive. She treated the incapacitated combatant like any other critical patient. Assessment, stabilization, documentation. The gun lay 10 feet away. Police were already coming through the doors, sirens had been screaming in the distance for 30 seconds, and now they were here, flashlights cutting through the chaos, uniforms moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. The waiting room erupted in a chaos that felt distant and small. A mother in the corner pulled her daughter against her chest, shielding the girl's eyes from the scene, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay," the words a prayer more than a statement of fact. Visitors scrambled away from the gunman's body. Someone was crying. Someone else was already on their phone, probably calling friends, probably already posting about it on social media. Katie stepped back from the prone man as the first officer moved past her toward the weapon. She didn't acknowledge him. She didn't explain. She just stepped back and let the next phase of the crisis unfold, the one that belonged to law enforcement, to investigation, to the machinery of an armed response. But that wasn't the worst part. Dr. Mercer emerged from his office exactly 30 minutes later, once the police had secured the scene and the gunman had been transported in restraints to county jail. His face was composed into an expression of administrative concern, the look of someone performing worried leadership for an audience. He moved directly to the nursing station where Katie was documenting the gunman's condition on the chart. "I need to speak with you," he said. Not a request. An announcement. She looked up. Her hands were no longer shaking. The adrenaline had already metabolized into something colder. "I'm filing an incident report," Mercer continued, his voice dropping into the confidential tone he used when he wanted other people to listen. "Excessive use of force. Failure to follow de-escalation protocols. The hospital has a very specific policy." He had a gun. Katie's voice came out level. Flat. A statement of fact, nothing more. "You escalated the situation." Mercer was already building something, his eye scanning the ER for witnesses, for people who'd seen her throw the gunman with a Marine's precision and a Special Forces operator's efficiency. "You should have called for security. You should have attempted verbal de-escalation. You could have been shot. You could have gotten someone else shot. He got you unarmed in 8 seconds. That's not the point." Mercer's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being contradicted, wasn't used to someone standing their ground against his administrative authority. "The point is that we have procedures. Joint Commission standards. Liability concerns. I'm going to need your badge, effective immediately. You're on administrative leave pending investigation. You can't access the hospital or any systems. Go home." The words hit her like a blast. Not because of the suspension, she'd been expecting something from him since the humiliation during grand rounds. But because of what it meant. The mission. The inventory discrepancies she'd been tracking for 6 weeks. The night shift supervisor with the pattern of gaps in the controlled substance logs. The fentanyl shipments that had been diverted, the same supply chain that got Maria Vasquez killed in Bagram. Her handler had 6 missed calls on her phone. By tomorrow night, she was supposed to have access to the pharmacy records. Tomorrow night was her window. And now she was off the hospital floor. Locked out. Cut off from the investigation. Katie unclipped her badge slowly. She'd worn it for 8 months, built her cover as a floor nurse piece by piece, learned every schedule, every supplier, every pressure point in Seattle General's controlled substances tracking. The badge felt heavier than it should as she set it on the counter. "I understand," she said. Mercer's mouth twitched, surprise, maybe, or irritation that she wasn't fighting harder. "You can expect a formal notification within 48 hours. Don't contact anyone in the hospital. That's an institutional requirement." He walked away before she could respond. Katie watched him disappear into his office, the door closing with the soft click of a man who'd just executed something he'd been planning for weeks. By morning, he'd have witness statements collected through leading questions. By evening, he'd have annotated security footage showing every detail of her movement, every ounce of force she'd applied, building a case that looked reasonable under fluorescent lights and bureaucratic oversight. She couldn't go home. Home was just an apartment 40 minutes away, a place where she'd spent most nights staring at the folded flag on her dresser, remembering Maria Vasquez's face, remembering the weight of a dying Marine in her arms, remembering the promise she'd made in the dirt of Bagram that she'd finish what her team started. Instead, she drove south on I-10 toward the interstate, toward the diner that stayed open all night, the one with the flickering neon and the coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime in 2019. She parked in an empty spot near the highway, walked inside, and ordered coffee from a waitress who didn't recognize her and didn't care. The cup was chipped. The coffee was lukewarm. Katie sat in a booth and stared at her reflection in the darkened window, the glass showing her back to herself, fractured by rain that had started falling against the parking lot like applause. Her phone showed 6 missed calls. Her DoD handler wanted to know why she wasn't responding. The mission was collapsing. The investigation she'd spent 8 months building, positioned exactly where she needed to be, was disintegrating because Mercer had weaponized policy against her, had moved faster and smarter than she'd anticipated. She'd been so focused on the hidden threat that she'd missed the visible one. The folded flag sat in her apartment on the dresser, locked away, the same flag she'd carried out of Bagram 5 years ago. Maria Vasquez's flag. The symbol of every promise Katie had made and every mission she'd failed to complete. She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass and wondered if she was about to fail again. Dr. Mercer emerged from his office the moment the police secured the scene, his face flushed with something that might have been adrenaline or might have been rage. The gunman lay unconscious on the triage floor, zip-tied wrists, blood trickling from a split lip where he'd connected with the desk. 2 officers were already photographing the scene, their radios crackling with dispatch codes. Mercer walked straight past them toward Katie, his voice sharp enough to cut through the chaos still settling around the waiting room. "Nurse Rodriguez, we need to document your use of force. Immediately." Katie was checking the gunman's pulse, professional, methodical, the kind of calm that made everyone around her feel like they were the ones panicking. She didn't look up. "He's stable. BP 105/62. Respiration regular. No signs of serious head trauma." "I said now." Mercer's shadow fell across the unconscious man. "What you did violated every de-escalation protocol we have. You created liability." The police officer nearest them, a sergeant with 20 years etched into his face, turned and stared at Mercer. "Your nurse just stopped a 7-foot tweaker with a stolen police weapon from executing someone. That's not liability. That's heroism. That's excessive force pending investigation," Mercer said flatly. He was already pulling his phone from his pocket, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. And I'm invoking Joint Commission Regulation 7.2.4. Any staff on visitor physical altercation requires immediate administrative leave pending formal inquiry. Effective now. Katie finally looked at him. Her eyes were steady, the color of steel left out in winter rain. There are 3 patients in critical condition upstairs. Covered. I'm already calling ICU staffing. Mercer's smile was thin. You're on administrative suspension, effective immediately. Surrender your badge and keys before you leave the building. The waiting room had gone quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the active silence of 30 people holding their breath. A mother pulled her child closer. A man in his 60s stared at Katie with the intensity of someone reassessing everything he'd just witnessed. Katie rose slowly, her movements fluid and economical as water finding its level. She reached for her badge. The laminated ID swung on its lanyard, her photo from 8 months ago, before the humiliation campaign had begun, when her smile still had something authentic in it. Before Mercer had decided she represented a threat to the hierarchy he'd spent 30 years constructing. I'll need everything in writing, she said quietly. You'll have it. Mercer was already walking away, his phone to his ear. This is Dr. Mercer. I need you to pull the security footage from the ER for the last 20 minutes. And get me a witness statement from nursing staff about the force used. Yes, I understand she stopped an armed suspect. I also understand she created documentation liability. Just pull it. By the time Katie had changed out of her scrubs, Mercer's 3-page memo to the hospital president was already in her official file. She'd caught a glimpse of it when HR handed over her suspension paperwork, his handwriting dense and precise, each paragraph building on the last like bricks in a wall designed to bury her. Excessive use of force. Failure to follow established protocols. Potential liability exposure. Pattern of independent decision-making that exceeds her scope of practice. But that wasn't what made her hands clench in the parking lot, standing by her truck with the folded flag tucked against her ribs under her jacket. The suspension meant no access to the pharmacy records. No ability to cross-reference the night shift supervisor's credential card swipes against the inventory discrepancies she'd been tracking for 6 weeks. No way to prove that someone on staff was moving fentanyl in quantities that matched the DEA pattern intelligence, 50 units here, 75 there, always just small enough to stay under the automated auditing threshold. She'd been so close. Another 2 weeks and she would have had the evidence the DOD needed. She sat in her truck for 8 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of diesel and rain about to fall. The suspension letter was on the passenger seat, her termination of access effective immediately, her clearance for the hospital's controlled substance database revoked. 8 months of 3 a.m. chart reviews. 8 months of careful questions. 8 months of building the kind of trust that allowed her to sit with the night pharmacist and discuss staffing shortages and overtime patterns. All of it, erased. At 3 a.m., Katie sat in an empty diner 17 miles south on Interstate 37, the kind of place that existed in the space between towns, where the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs and nobody asked questions. The rain hammered the windows in waves, each gust shaking the glass like something furious was trying to get in. Or maybe like something inside was trying to escape. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The mug sat untouched, dark and still, a small lake of abandoned purpose. She stared at her reflection in the darkened window, the glass turned her into a ghost image, translucent and uncertain, someone watching from the other side of a wall that couldn't be breached. The faces came then, the way they always did at 3 a.m. The 3 soldiers she'd carried through Bagram. 2 of them lived. James Morrison with her call sign on his arm, the one who'd watched her hands work in the dust and blood and darkness. And Martinez, who made it to Walter Reed and became a physical therapist. But there was Garrison, the platoon sergeant, the one who'd lost too much blood before she even reached him, whose eyes had already gone glass before the medevac touched down. She'd saved the 2 who could be saved. But she'd also saved the gunman tonight. Subdued him. Called for paramedics. Ensured he lived to stand trial, to take up space in the justice system, to breathe air that better men had earned the right to breathe. The fentanyl investigation was about saving people too, the ones drowning in a chemical war that nobody called a war because the weapons came in small packets instead of bullets. But if she couldn't access the data, if Mercer's vendetta had successfully locked her out of the hospital, then the theft would continue. The night supervisor would move another 200 units next month. Some of it would hit the street. Some of it would kill people who'd never hurt anyone but themselves. Katie pressed her forehead against the cold window glass. The rain was relentless, hammering the glass with a sound like distant artillery, like the rotors of a Black Hawk moving in for extraction. The coffee went colder. Time moved forward like a wounded animal, slow and certain. And somewhere in Seattle General, in a hospital she could no longer enter without an escort, evidence was probably being erased or buried or reorganized in ways that would take her months to sort through if she ever got back inside. She'd failed before. She'd carry that weight. She'd carry Garrison's face and the weight of his body and the 140 pounds of muscle and bone and borrowed time that she couldn't quite save. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't just failing one person. This time she was failing everyone the fentanyl would find, and Mercer knew it, and that was why he'd used the suspension like a knife, surgical and precise. The diner's neon sign reflected in the window, red and blue bleeding across her ghost image like old bruises. And Katie Rodriguez, Captain Katie Rodriguez, Reaper 6 Actual, sat in the dark with cold coffee and stared at the faces she couldn't save, the ones she wouldn't be able to reach, the ones drowning in a chemical that nobody considered a weapon until it was too late. Thursday morning, 7:13 a.m. A construction worker named Diego Flores arrives at Seattle General in a trauma transport with a compound leg fracture and rebar punched through his right thigh. Katie isn't scheduled. She's still on suspension, sitting at home staring at walls, waiting for the board to finish its investigation into Dr. Mercer's allegations. But she's checked the hospital records every morning for a week, a habit from 8 months of surveillance, and when she sees the name and injury pattern, her hands move before her brain can catch up. She's in her truck, driving, before she consciously decides to drive. The ER erupts when she walks through the automatic doors. 3 nurses recognize her immediately. The attending physician, a younger woman named Dr. Chen who actually respects competence, turns with her mouth open. Katie moves past all of them toward Bay 8 where Diego's being prepped for surgery. She doesn't have a shift. She has no authority. She shouldn't be here. The suspended badge still in her locker would confirm all of Mercer's accusations if anyone bothered to check. But Katie's learned that sometimes doing the right thing and having permission to do it are 2 different nations entirely, and she's crossed harder borders than this. Then Diego opens his eyes. Recognition hits him like a physical thing, his entire body goes rigid on the stretcher. His hand reaches out, trembling, and when he speaks his voice barely exceeds a whisper. Reaper 6. Not a question. A confirmation. A name that doesn't belong anywhere in America, a call sign only spoken in Kandahar, in compounds with no names, in interrogation rooms where Katie Rodriguez had broken a man's ribs to keep 43 soldiers alive. Diego's eyes flood. He grabs her arm with a grip that would have hurt if she were capable of feeling pain anymore. It's you. It's really you. The room goes so quiet you can hear the ventilator's mechanical wheeze. Dr. Chen's expression shifts from confusion to understanding to something like awe. Nurses exchange glances. Someone whispers. Mercer isn't here, he rarely ventures into the actual trauma bays anymore, prefers his office where he can orchestrate his destruction from climate-controlled comfort, but his absence only amplifies the significance of what's just transpired. A name. A call sign. A moment that rewrites everything. Then James Morrison's voice cuts through the silence. He emerges from Bay 4, still wearing the patient ID band from his own checkup, his tattooed forearm raised like evidence. He's holding his phone, scrolling to something he's clearly bookmarked, because his hands shake exactly like a man holding something sacred. Katie, he says, and her actual name, not nurse, not employee, not the quietly competent woman he met 5 years ago in a dusty compound, her actual name carries weight she didn't know she'd been waiting to hear spoken aloud. He reads from his phone. His voice wavers. Captain Katie Rodriguez, for extraordinary heroism under fire, carried 3 wounded soldiers through enemy territory in direct contact with hostile forces, demonstrating extraordinary valor above and beyond the call of duty. Captain Rodriguez, we owe you our lives. He lowers the phone. His eyes are shining. This is real, right? This is actually you. Katie doesn't answer because she doesn't have to. The truth is written in her bearing, in the way her hands move with terrifying fluid precision, in the fact that a man she once detained now feels safe enough to cry in front of her. The truth is written in the silence that's filled the room like pressurized air before a decompression. Then the door to Bay 8 explodes inward. Dr. Mercer stands in the threshold holding a file folder like a weapon. His face has aged 5 years in the last 2 weeks, his skin has gone grey, his eyes have taken on the hunted quality of a man watching his kingdom crumble into dust. Behind him, Katie can see his hands are shaking. Not from fear. From rage. From the particular fury of someone who spent 30 years climbing and suddenly realizes he's been falling the entire time. Katie Rodriguez, he announces, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire ER. Your employment with Seattle General is effective immediately terminated. You are not authorized to be in this facility. Security will escort you from the premises. He opens the file folder. Termination paperwork. He's had this prepared, waiting for the moment she slipped up, the moment she violated protocol again. He's standing on the edge of a cliff and he's bringing her with him. Diego starts laughing. It's a bitter sound, the laugh of a man who's spent 5 years carrying guilt and suddenly understands the truth. He speaks in broken English, his words deliberate and loud enough for everyone to hear. Doctor, you want to fire this nurse. Because she saved my life. Because she broke my ribs during interrogation in Bagram, and inside those broken ribs were 43 coalition soldiers still breathing. She chose to hurt me. To save them. You understand? She is the person who saves lives. You are the person who destroys them. The temperature in the room drops. Someone's pager beeps and then immediately gets silenced. Mercer's mouth opens and closes like he's searching for words that don't exist in English or any language he's ever spoken. Then Marcus Webb appears behind him. The hospital IT specialist, former Marine with the bearing of a man who's installed more servers than his forgotten people, carries a laptop balanced against his chest. He's calm. Methodical. The way someone is calm when they're holding all the cards and everyone knows it. Dr. Mercer, Marcus says, and his voice sounds like gravel slowly crushing stone. I need you to see something. He moves beside Katie and opens the laptop. 7 security camera angles. 7 separate deletion attempts. Every one timestamp documented. Every one showing premeditation. The screen flickers. Frame after frame of security footage, each with a timestamp, each showing Mercer's administrative credentials being used to delete, delete, delete. I preserved every frame. Already forwarded to the hospital board. And the state licensing authorities. And the Texas Medical Board. They are particularly interested in how you misapplied Joint Commission Regulation HC.01.02.05, which contains an explicit exemption for staff protecting patients from immediate danger. The one you cited in your termination paperwork. Dr. Mercer's face has gone the color of old bone. His hands drop to his sides. The termination folder falls open, pages scattered across the tile floor like confetti at a funeral. Katie watches all of this with the stillness of someone who's learned that her power doesn't require violence, doesn't require volume, doesn't require anything but the simple fact of her continued existence. The truth doesn't need her to defend it. The truth defends itself. You should go, she says to Mercer. Not cruel. Not kind. Just a statement of fact, delivered in the calm voice of someone who's learned that mercy and firmness are the same thing from certain angles. Your presence is making people uncomfortable. He leaves through the back exit, boxes of 30 years of achievement tucked against his chest like a child's security blanket. Nobody tries to stop him. Nobody speaks. The ER continues its work around the empty space where he stood, nurses and residents already turning their attention back to patients and charts and the endless small machinery of keeping people alive. 6 months later, Katie Rodriguez stands in the ambulance bay of Seattle General at 6:17 p.m., watching the San Antonio sun bleed orange and red across the parking lot. The heat's finally breaking. Through the bay window, she sees a medical supply van pull up to the loading dock. The driver climbs out, carrying boxes of 4 lines and bandages. She recognizes him immediately. Dr. Mercer. His physician's license suspended pending investigation. His administrative career ended. His power dissolved like sugar in water. Now he drives supplies between facilities, making $12 an hour, and Katie understands with perfect clarity that this is not punishment. This is mercy. He still has work. He still has purpose. He's just finally found something approximating his actual size. Katie's locker smells like metal and old leather. Inside sits the folded flag, a Maria's flag, still pressed perfect despite years of handling. Next to it rests her new appointment letter framed in simple oak, Katie Rodriguez, RN, BSN, Captain USAR, Clinical Director, Seattle General Emergency Department. Her name. Her actual name. Her rank. Her position. All of it on official letterhead. She touches the flag once for luck, a habit from Bagram, a ritual from the woman she was when she was breaking down in supply closets and drinking cold coffee at 3 a.m. But the woman pulling on scrubs now doesn't need luck the same way. The woman pulling on scrubs now knows something Mercer never learned, that power isn't a title you claim. It's something people grant you by choosing to follow. The new trauma nurse approaches nervously as Katie gathers her clipboard. Is it true you performed surgery with a combat knife? The nurse asks, and Katie considers the question with the patience of someone who's learned that stories are just information transmitted in a way people can survive hearing. I did what the situation required, Katie says. Same as now. Different tools. She ties her hair back. Checks the ER board. 3 patients waiting. 2 criticals incoming. 1 possible stroke in transit. The work continues. It always continues. At shift change, she tells the gathering nurses something Maria once told her in a compound with no name in a country with too many names for different kinds of pain. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together. The nurses listen because they understand now. Because they've watched Katie Rodriguez work. Because they know she's speaking from experience. Then she disappears into Bay 4 with a chart, just another nurse doing the work, except everyone in Seattle General knows now that holding it all together sometimes means breaking the rules. Sometimes means walking into a room where you don't belong because people who matter are bleeding. Sometimes means carrying a folded flag in your locker for 5 years before anyone understands what it means. The shift continues. The patients keep arriving. The machines keep beeping. The hours accumulate into nights, and Katie Rodriguez works through all of it with a kind of competence that can't be measured in titles or office space or pieces of paper from the hospital administration. If you're watching this right now, you know there are people like Katie working in every hospital in America, people whose real strength is hidden beneath scrubs and professionalism and the kind of quiet power that only reveals itself when it's absolutely necessary. Subscribe to our channel, because we're going to keep telling their stories. Like this video if you believe that true strength is what you do when nobody's watching. And comment below, have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your real capability? Tell us your story. We're listening.